Morning, Deirdre.
Good morning, Tom. How are you today?
You know, I love it in Iceland. I really do. But I think I want to go home.
Well, fortunately, this is the last of our videos in the 71 series, so you'll be able to leave Iceland as soon as we're finished recording.
Maybe I
And
can go to Greenland instead.
it could be. And
It's a
maybe
beautiful country too, by the way.
beautiful country. And maybe what we do here is spend a few minutes recapping what we mean by the whole 71 series here. That this is our standard series of videos, which is divided into three parts, where we start with the board discussions, then go into making a decision, and then go into what we call university, which is the how-to part. And the 71 series started with a CEO picking up the phone and calling the board chair and say, I want to talk about using AI agents in this business. And it turned out, by the way, that this is our eighth video, I believe, in the 71 series, that
So,
the two in the board discussion series started with, it was clear that the CEO and the board chair just didn't think they had the right people, didn't know what they were talking about, and they decided to do some research and come back with an initial plan for the next board meeting. They came back in a week. That's our video 71-1B. And both of them talked with the board, talked with the management team, came up with an education plan. And you and I believe, commented, Tom, that this was progress, but they were going to find that they didn't make as much progress as they thought. Then we moved into our making a decision session where we talked about ways that both the board chair and the CEO could have worked through their thoughts and their information to come up with a better conversation, to start with a better place. And we spent two videos on that. Those are videos 71-2A and -2B. Then we moved into university, and we've been following your five-step process for working with these LLMs, these AI models, talking our way through how we worked with these models on a project to get some results we want. And I think at this point, Tom, I turn it over to you to talk about your five-step process.
okay. So, what this is a process for working with AI models for complex work. And when we talk about complex work, Deirdre, we're talking about the work that leaders would do, CEOs, board chairs, board directors, strategic work, far-sighted work, deep research work where you're interested in competition, for example, or marketplaces or opportunities, or being able to project things that you're having difficulty seeing, learning new things. But at the leadership level, at the high-end leadership level, although we believe that this process can be used all the way down through the universities for teaching, and matter of fact has huge value there, which is
Yes.
a different process that we could show. But the five-step process works regardless. It has five steps, obviously. The first is a research where what you're doing in that step is you're exploring the capability of a model and you're looking for its reach or what we call breadth of information available about the topic. And then how much of a bias does it have? And we think of bias not as necessarily good or bad. It just gives you an indication of does the research, does the base of data that the algorithms are using, the AI algorithms are using, does that base of data have a slant to it? The example I use is it may not cover all four seasons of the year in the same depth. It may focus more on the spring and the fall, or and kind of shy away from the winter and the summer because of the aspects that are interesting about those. So you end up with a little bit less information, and that can actually, when you're using it to give you an answer could give you an answer that is showing you an answer that predicts with a slightly different direction that is real, right? Or than you want it to. And so you need to know that. And you discover that by researching the model, looking for the depth and looking for what we call bias. Regardless of good or bad, there's also the good or bad bias, and that's social bias and all kinds of other things that are not good, information that's not correct that can seep into the data and so forth. What we're really looking for here, though, is the subtle bias in research. The second is the interaction. This is where you begin to interact with the machine, where you're guiding the machine and training it in what you want to use it for, so that you're positioning it properly. And we've taken you through in these videos and shown you exactly what we're doing, how you do that. Then there's the context piece. This is where you now influence the model by giving it your view of the subject. Prior to this, it's all been you using the model's view. This is where you introduce your view in just a clean way. You say, here's the essay I wrote on this, or here is the outline of my thinking on this subject, or here are the 21 questions I have for you about this that are unique. Whatever it is, this is where you input your piece. And then you work on number four, which is where you're now doing an analysis with the machine on synthesizing this work, where you're putting the work of the machine and your individual work together and doing analysis and comparison and starting to make judgments. And finalizing it is the human themselves. This is where you take the result, and as you said to me, it was very well said this morning, Deirdre, where you move away from the model for piece five. Piece four is you take the result from the model, and in piece five, you now, as the human, have to take that result and make it yours. You make the final judgments, the final thoughts about how it's used, and you now portray it the way you want it to be portrayed. Write it the way you want it to be written, present it the way you want it to be presented. You use other tools, obviously, perhaps Word, PowerPoint, whatever. And by the way, you can have the machine create much of this for you. It's just you step away from the machine and you are now working with it yourself. You're pulling it together and writing it. So this is not where we don't look at it the same way as somebody, I think, said to you, who's, by the way, their own professional, they're playing with it, and they went all the way from beginning to end and said, write me something on this. And then they took it at the end and published it or intend to publish it. And it, by the way, what they're doing is fascinating. It's not original work by the human, though. That's the thing. And they're very carefully labeling it that way. But it will be very interesting to see the result. That we're not talking about that at all. What we're talking about here is really not the experimentation that our friend is doing and colleague, but this is doing serious leadership work, serious work of the CEO. Any thoughts, Deirdre, before we pull away from this and move on to exactly what you're doing?
I think, Tom, that we proceed with showing people how we've worked with a document, and that's the book that I'm writing on content, and worked with two models on this. One of the points about bias is that the different models come out with different content, and
Oh,
we've
do they ever?
documented that fairly fully in videos 3A, 3B, and 3C. Now in 3D, it becomes important, and part of the work of synthesis is to take the two documents with their different slants, I'll use that term, and combine them into a document that you can work with. But why don't you proceed and take people through what you've done first with Claude and then with Grok, and how then we're going to proceed with the synthesis?
Sure. So, uh, what we what we did was we have me using this because my versions are the more professional versions, so you get to see the scalability of this. I don't have the very top level of either one of these models, but more like a level that you would use yourself, meaning you, the CEO or board chair, where you're spending 20, 30, $40 a month on this, not the 50 or 100 version that some of our colleagues use for different reasons. So sometimes we're slowed up a little. Sometimes we're told, you have to wait a little bit until you can come back. And some of the work we do, and we'll talk about this when we do get into it here, it'll take hours for it to do. I think we got a message, what, Deirdre, give me 45 minutes or give me a couple of hours. I'll be back to you at noontime or something.
And it
Um,
didn't get back to us until 2 p.m. Yes.
yes, yes, exactly. Now, I have to say, we do stretch the limit of these things. And this was a very powerful model. We won't get into the details of that, but let's start it at Claude. So I'm showing you Grok on the screen here. But I'm going to start with Claude because that's where we created it. We created the project called Deirdre's Content Book, and we had this chat stream. We only had one chat stream. We loaded instructions in. We've covered this. This is where you tell it how you want it to perform. When you look at this, it's artifact production, critical thinking. Um, we ask for confidence intervals, pros and cons, summarize, so forth. And we always say, please, before you start your work, ask us clarifying questions that you may have, and we'll answer it. We do that so it doesn't waste our time, right? Because we don't want it to just do a core dump on us about its own thinking and it's off the track, right? We want it to stay on the track that we're defined. This is the concept of leading the model, where we say you have to be in front of the model and lead that model because it will lead you down paths you don't want to go. We put in a few pieces of information here. One is the Deirdre's book. This is what this is here, this version 10, using content to grow your business. Now, we'll see in a minute, we did not put that in until a certain stage. You know that that's the context stage of the 5 steps. That is step number 3, the very core thing, because we didn't want it to have the book yet. We wanted to have it give us some information about itself and what its view of the marketplace. We put in Deirdre's bio. She's the one who wrote the book, so it needs to know who she is and what do we want it to know about her. And then something we just loaded in that you see here that we'll talk about in a minute. This is the Grok analysis that got to the same point that we are in Claude. But let's take you through the work that we did. So we started out here with it always starts you at the bottom here, and so you have to go to the top. And bear with me while I scroll so you can look away here and not be grabbing for Dramamine. So we started this analysis out by saying to Claude, I need help, and said, I want to find out the following. Uh, I've written a book and publishing in January. And before I upload the book, I'd like to know what you see in the marketplace. We gave it some context a little bit about what we were talking about. Again, this is that first step. This is the step where we're trying to figure out, okay, what does Grok know about this? And do they know enough to do the research we want them to do or it to do? And it came back and said, true to what we said, it said, I'm happy to do the research. Before that, let me ask you some clarifying questions. And it asked questions. And then it talked about the market analysis and so forth. And by the way, they were good questions. This is where we gave answers. So we're willing to answer its questions. So Deirdre then gave us questions. And this is where I tell you, I prefer to work outside the model on prompts like this so that you don't get caught and you can keep a record of them properly. And the worst thing that happens, and those of you that use this the way we do, you're halfway through this and you meant to hit, shift enter so that it puts you down the next line, and you hit enter and it has half your answers and it tries to work with the half you just gave it. So we don't like to waste its time, just like we don't want to waste our time. So we find that doing this work outside of this is best. So what we do is we took its questions, and you'll notice that those are its questions, and then we put our answers. And we tried to keep the answers very short where we could. And here it talks about the market analysis, and we went through and just answered its questions as best we could. And then we turned it loose, and it said, perfect. Let me dive in. Then it does the stuff that is really valuable. It tells you the work it's doing and how many sources and gave you the sources. And those of you that use this model know this. Really valuable. This is what we call explainability, the early phases of explainability. It's not telling you how it came up with all of that, but it did at least give you some of the end results. Now it said, I have enough information. Let me give you some research. And so it gave us our research. And this is now where you are interacting with the machine, looking at what level have I gotten from this thing. And it did a pretty good job, Deirdre, right?
Correct. Yes.
And you were fairly happy with this because we had just done it here and it gave us a
Correct.
lot of information. We won't go through this. We went through all this in the prior video, but it talks about the analysis and observations. It talked about gaps and what's working, what's not, the market momentum, and then had some questions for Deirdre. And basically, it wanted us to put the book in, right? It wanted to see what, notice this, shall I upload your book reference materials now so I can see what you what you're talking about, right? So I think this was a point at which we felt it was only fair to put the book in there, right?
Right.
Right. So that's when we uploaded the book. And you see, this is when we say, this is great, thanks, I've uploaded the book. You'll find the sources. And I find it really helpful to do this as a Word file titled version 10. This is exactly what you find. Now, I should have put .x or .docx here. It always helps them because if you don't do everything, sometimes it gets caught. And but it did find it fine and started working through what it saw. Now, this is an interesting point, Deirdre, right? Do you want to cover this? What happened here?
Yes. Well, it reviewed my work. It liked my book, so I love Claude. But then it went into a comparison between my book and other books in the marketplace. Now, I tend to be a little more academic than some of the general books in the marketplace, and Claude kept pointing this out and pointing it out. But it gave me good points about what I do differently, what my strengths were here. And then it came up with some challenges for me, positioning challenges, because remember, I'm an academic publishing in the public marketplace here. And then it asked me a lot of questions before it wanted me to continue. Now, I decided not to answer those questions yet. Remember that I lead the model. I don't have to answer these questions. I'm more interested in getting information from the model. So we proceeded, Tom, going down in the conversation here.
Yeah, I'd actually like to interject something even more profound here for these people.
Please.
We had a series of instructions, right? Remember this? Where
Yes.
we said, please, um, basically, when you do this kind of work, we'd like to see the following. But even more important, notice this. Let me know when you have reviewed the book before you do any more work on this. And what did it do? It should have just stopped right here, right in that first sentence. It didn't. It did the work anyway. And this is what we mean by you have to lead these models because it did a bunch of work here, but this is not what we were going to ask it to do. This was good, interesting, but notice the prompt that we had to do here. We appreciate all the work you've done so far. Thank you for that. What I'd like is to have you do a compare and contrast of what you found in the marketplace for Deirdre's book, meaning it did its own thought process, but it didn't do what we asked. Now, when we say compare and contrast, it went through and it picked up the information from our instructions that we gave it as a general way of working with us. And it started to actually do the work that Deirdre had intended to say. Now that I know you've had a chance to review the book, now please proceed. Now, why did we do it that way? A couple of reasons. Sometimes it doesn't scan the book all the way or the material all the way. If you've given it a lot of resources, sometimes it won't index all of it, and it'll just work based on the fact it's only indexed 20% of what you've given it. And so I like to stop the model and say, tell me when you've internalized all of it, right? Or when you have had a chance to review it all. That's what we wanted. So with that, we then gave it this set of instructions and it went back and did the work that Deirdre wanted it to do. So based on that, Deirdre, this is where you were headed in this last minute.
Correct. And I think I want to say one more thing about the point you're making here, Tom. This is one of those biases we're talking about.
Yep,
These biases come from the training, the algorithms, general instructions that get tweaked from time to time. We know this. We keep hearing about how the companies that create these models keep tweaking their instructions to the models. And the problem with this, and we've seen it, and we've actually referred to this in some of our previous videos, is that some of the models can drill down to a point where you don't want to go. They
yep,
can take you in a direction that sounds good, sounds interesting, but when you step back and look at it, it's not where you want to go. This is why it is so important for the human to be leading the model, doing all.
absolutely. Deirdre, and you and I have talked about this. This is where, if you think about this, and notice again, one of the biases that we have in the way we work with models is we think you have to lead them. So it's best if you're going to lead them, because they have incredible power and capability, which we're just showing you through these videos. Um, if you're going to truly lead them for your own sake, we think it's best if you think about them almost the way you would a very, very smart colleague or an assistant or an intern or an executive assistant at the professional level, and that you will treat them that way. So that's why we use human-like prompts. And I know that Sam Altman is opposed to that because he says, well, you're just wasting our compute time. Yes, but what wastes your compute time much worse is where we don't sharpen how we actually deal with you. And this way we sharpen how we deal. So we treat it like a human. We appreciate all the work you've done so far. Thank you for that. Just like you would with somebody that went out and did something you didn't ask them to do. You don't want to discourage them. You say, thank you. I appreciate all that. What we'd like you to do next, though, is this: do a true compare and contrast. All I was hoping you'd do is just walk in here 2 minutes after and you looked over your desk and said, I have everything I need. Let me now get started. What would you like me to do specifically? And so then it went through this, Deirdre, right? And this was actually good. And by the way, we love Claude. We love Anthropic. We love their leadership. We love the way they do this. So when we talk about how we use it and what we like and dislike, it's the edge case. We're showing you the edge case. But it is important for you, if you're going to use these models and use them using complex tasks, creating a strategy, looking at a market, analyzing a marketplace, analyzing an opportunity, deciding how that fits in your organization, what kind of culture would best fit the approach you're going to use in what marketplace. All these complex tasks that you'd normally ask a McKinsey-like or Boston Consulting Group to do, you can do a lot of this yourself and teach yourself about it. So with that, I'll just let you now take over, Deirdre, because this is your book and your analysis.
Okay. Well, to my mind, it's doing a fine job here. It's giving me information about the marketplace, about the competition. Um, some of the inside information I'm going to need. Now, remember what it's doing, though, is, and I'm going to anticipate slightly here, Tom, but I think it's an important point that when we look at the Grok comparison, we'll see that Grok came up with different sources, with different
Mhm.
books. And I estimated that there's only about a 25% overlap in the sources that Grok identified and that Claude identified. And this is the sort of thing that you have to keep in mind when you're interpreting the results of what one of these models does, that you're working with what it is providing. Now, that does not mean this isn't extremely valuable. It does not mean that I couldn't just work with the Claude output and come to a good result down the road. But part of your interpretation about what the model does for you is understanding that it's working within its own limits, or within how it's been trained. So there may be other aspects of this that you're not getting. Now, frankly, in terms of what I'm asking it for, I don't think it's missing all that much. And remember that we talked about in an earlier video that what Claude is doing is more of the analysis while Grok drills down into the how-to type of work, the more detailed work and so forth, which is what's going to make the synthesis so interesting. But now what I've got from Claude is a good bit of work, very useful for me, and I'm ready to move farther in the process with it.
Yeah, so let me just continue though to tell you again, Claude did not do everything we asked for because even to this point, it didn't give us from the instruction set we gave it, which we covered in detail back in the early part of the these videos. I think we covered it 2 videos ago, where we talked about why do we define logical inconsistencies or initial recommendations or pros and cons or likes and dislikes, confidence intervals for and against. We do that for a very good reason, but we tell the model up front, this is how we want you to function with us. And we put that in as an overall instruction for the project. And this is the project we've got here called Deirdre's Content Book. So we said, thank you. Thank you for the work you've done. And you notice I just paged through it and reviewed it with you all. If you were looking at this, if you're driving, it was page after page after page of really good information. But what it didn't do with was the next step that you and I wanted, Deirdre, was tell
Right,
us about any logical inconsistencies or gaps you see.
right.
Give me your initial recommendation. Then give us pros and cons and likes and dislikes. And we talk about what the distinction is. And we go through that in a couple of videos ago. And give us a confidence interval. One of the things you'll learn very quickly about this is confidence interval does a great job of showing you bias. Because one of the things we ask for is we say, show us not only the confidence interval, but show us how you would recommend we improve that confidence interval. Because, and that'll show you whether, again, is it something that we think is correct for this in this marketplace? That'll help with you with some element of bias, but also how confident is the model in that its scope and reach is good enough to give you the answer it's giving you. Um, again, you don't have to believe the confidence interval, but it just gives you another indication. Strongest case for and against your recommendation as you develop them. Offer the changes to with pros and cons for what would increase your confidence interval. And then finally, give us what your risk adjusted final recommendation would be. Whether we should incorporate those changes or not. Would you? Would you recommend that? Again, this is all good things that those of you, and Deirdre, I know you've done these jobs and I have too along the way. As a good analyst for somebody, whether it's financial or executive or strategic or whatever it is, you do this kind of work. This is exactly what they want you to come back with. And so we're not, again, this is a case of are you using things from that have to be created to work with today's world, or can you look back and say some of these frameworks we use still apply? And this is the case of some of these frameworks we use, they still apply. They're being used in a different way, but they still apply. And this is a case of where good analytic work for complex work like this of a leader in business, these methods still apply. And it did an excellent job once it finally got there. But notice it took two instruction sets to get it there. And again, this is Deirdre's point when she said earlier, don't let the model tell you what to do. You know what you want to do. Or if you are leading it, it's like you lead anything. Your instincts, your judgment, your experience tells you which direction you want to go. Don't vary unless there's a really good reason and you're deliberately doing that. Don't get led by the model unless you believe it. And now it came through and gave us some really interesting things, right?
Yes. Hmm.
And it came
And
through.
all of this is great content. All of it is very useful, particularly the gaps I see, because these are things that I, as an author, am not going to be focusing on. I think my book is perfect. So it's very useful to me to have an intelligent assistant tell me where I'm doing things that could be
Yeah.
fixed in quotation marks to make my book better.
And a good example of you don't think in these terms, Deirdre. You don't have a memorable villain, but look at all these authors that did, right? Your
Right.
competition in the marketplace, they did. Now, um, whether that villain, whether you want to incorporate that or not, is your choice. That's the human choice. That's the judgment and experience that you bring to it. But it's sure good to know this.
It's good to know this because this relates to the whole marketing of books. You know, you all know that if there's something contentious about something, it'll capture your attention. And the question is, do I want to go down that path? And that's a
Right.
decision I make down the road.
Personal story is a good example. That's not your and my strength. We don't like to do that for
Right.
various reasons. But
Correct.
many authors, they like that. It's good to know that that's, what it's seeing. And it comes back with the recommendations and it's finally doing it in the method we asked for. And it does
Right.
a good job. When it finally got there, it did a good job. And, to the point where Deirdre has taken this and over the last few weeks of the holiday has worked through this to decide what she's going to do. And actually you've incorporated some of these things in your book.
And that's the finalize step. I'll throw that out there right now. We're going to talk more about finalizing. But what Tom is just talking about is me taking the output of the synthesis stage and then finalizing it.
Yes. Now, what we did was we skipped a synthesis step, which we were preserving for this video. But Deirdre jumped ahead and did hers anyway, but
Right.
off this model.
Right.
But we're going to do it for you and show you that as the final thing we'll do here, and then we'll let you take the world from there. But part four, it talked about likes and dislikes, and it did a really nice job of doing this. And then it said what concerns them. And it came back. And again, all valid and good thinking. There's nothing in here that shows a low level thinking, a not well considered thinking. It may not match Deirdre's view of the marketplace or her judgment, but it's just like any good analyst, whether they're low level or high level. This is high level analytics and really valuable.
Hmm.
This is the kind of thing you would spend thousands of dollars in research fees from a consultant to get this level of output. It talked about confidence interval. It's saying, look, I think I'm pretty confident with this. Why not higher? Why not lower? So it's starting to really do good. What would increase it? Okay. Strongest case for and against. Market argument, competitive argument, strongest take against. Again, you're getting into really maybe overkill on some of this. It's okay. I mean, it didn't cost anything other than your own time to read this and a little bit of compute time, but you're paying for that.
Hmm.
And
But it's
changes to increase confidence. And some of this Deirdre did, most of it she didn't. But for her own reasons. and then, a option B, which was great. It gave you some other options, pros and cons of option B, and then an option C, and then did a risk adjustment final with pursue option A. I mean, this is good work. And Deirdre, why don't you comment? And then it did what we asked for, which and because this is again, you're looking at this. I haven't looked at this since, December 22nd until again today. This helps you figure out, okay, look, here's what we did. We did this, we did this, we did this. And
Right.
that's what you've just seen. And if you want to get into the details, then just go back up the stream here.
Correct. And let me give an example that one of the recommendations that it keeps making is that I put more Deirdre in the book, that I give more stories or more comments in the middle. The problem is I'm a professional working with professional clients, and I cannot talk about my clients. So that course of action is not open to me. Now, that's not something I'm going to discuss with Claude, but it's a decision that I have made and I take into account when I read through these recommendations. That's all part of the finalizing process. What's good for me to know is that my competition, as analyzed by Claude, does all of that stuff. That's interesting positioning information for me. So I know more about how to talk about my book. I can talk about my book as for more professional people. I can talk about my book as at a more professional level, not a generic level. All of the information is useful, even if I don't take particular recommendations. So even though, as Tom says, it provides a lot of information I'm not going to use, all of it is good for me to have read when making the finalizing decisions about my book.
And really valuable. This would be very hard to do by yourself. I mean, Deirdre, estimate the amount of time it would have taken for you to get to roughly this level if you had done this by yourself.
Oh, it would have taken a month,
Yeah,
frankly,
that's
with the
that's
market
my guess.
analysis, running out to bookstores to check, running through book catalogs, checking the internet, just a massive amount of work. And Claude did all of that work for me.
And we're not going to do this, but we could do the same for Grok. And we did the same thing. Notice the prompt is exactly the same to start Grok out with. And it came back and said, here's my thought. Here are the questions I have. And by the way, it went further than we wanted, right? We didn't ask for this yet. But fine, it came back and it gave us, again, a lot of information. But as Deirdre said, a lot of this was not what we got from Claude.
But what we are
Um,
seeing, Tom, is a bias difference here that Claude presents everything in prose. Grok puts in as many tables as it can create. It has
yes,
tables
it does.
all over the place.
And again, it did a lot of work that we didn't ask for. What we really wanted was a set of questions before the work started. Now, here are a set of questions I have answered about this work. Now, where did we answer those questions? Well, we answered them in Claude because what we wanted to do is to parallel the work and see what the difference in the output was. That's because the last model focused on what are the differences in models. They're not all the same, which is, by the way, a good thing for people that do complex work like we do, right? Because we're getting better and better information from different models in the use of these. It came and said thanks, and now it's starting to do what we asked for, and it did a great job. But again, it gave you new information, different information, but valuable information, right, Deirdre?
Correct. And I mentioned the 25% overlap. It's interesting in itself that there was only the 25% overlap, but I got using the two models, I think I got a pretty darn good overview of the entire marketplace here.
Absolutely. You
Complementary
really
work.
did. And even those, if you spent the time going through, which we don't here, but you could when you apply this to yourself, it gave us different perspectives even on the research that it did. So it looked at different factors for the most part, which was again fascinating.
Correct.
Now, at this stage, we've now moved to step three, where we've contextualized. We've said we've uploaded the book. This is what it's called. Let us know what, once you reviewed the book, before you do any more work on this. Notice how that's exactly what it did. It went through and said, I got it. Here are my questions. Okay. Now, no, that's how Grok functions. And then it went through and gave us a bunch of stuff. And again, all good stuff. And Deirdre took both actually, and
Correct.
a little bit more succinct than Claude. But during between Christmas and New Year's, Deirdre took both of these documents and used them herself uh,
Correct.
for the work that she did over the holidays to synthesize the two and work on her book because her book publishes later this month. Now, what is the next step that you wanted to do here, Deirdre? There is another valuable step that we could prove the power of these models.
Well, were we going to have Claude synthesize
Yeah,
these sets
exactly.
of
We could do it the other
information?
way. So this is where we tell, again, what model do we want to use for to give us this fourth step, which is the true synthesis. Now, instead of synthesizing the book against the marketplace, now what we want you to do is synthesize your recommendations against Claude's recommendations and tell us how you see that. So, what we did, we took what Claude recommended and we put it as an input into what Grok came up with and put it as an input into Claude. And that's what this document is. It's a PDF, Grok's compare and contrast to the marketplace. We then copied and pasted that into a PDF that we have now uploaded into Claude. And so if you were paying attention, which I don't want you to actually, I hope you didn't have to do, but that's what we put down here in the chat because we knew we'd get there. So the prompt is now we got to the bottom here. This is the final. And we put in the prompt, please do a compare and contrast of your most recent work with an analysis that Grok did, uploaded just now to your files, titled Grok's Compare and Contrast to the Marketplace PDF. Okay. Um, Now, one of the things we've talked about in prompting, we find that you tell it exactly what you want, but try not to limit its ability to function. So this is very much like the way you treat human beings that are working for you, right? Which is you try to tell them what you want, when you need it, why you need it, but you try not to tell them any more about the how than the general parameters you need that fit what the output needs to be. So we tend not to give it a bunch of guardrails on how we want it to function beyond the overall instructions that we've given about this in the past. So it'll be very interesting, Deirdre, to see. This is now what we've taken is we've got Grok that did its own set of recommendations on your book based against the marketplace. So it's analyzed your book against the marketplace and said, here's what I'm come up with. We've had Claude do roughly the same thing. It has different answers. Now we're saying take both, compare and contrast. All right, you ready?
I'm ready.
What it's likely to do is it may, depending on whether it's a bad time of day, it may come back and say it's going to take a while. So we may have to pause the video if it does, but I'll hit the enter button here. Um, okay.
It's actually doing the work fairly quickly.
Yeah. Now, we went on in Claude. Claude is a little sensitive to the length of conversations. So what it's doing now is compacting this conversation. It did hold me up a few times recently on another project I'm working on and told me that I needed to give it a little moment while it extended the chat. It didn't want to go into a new chat, but it needed to extend the chat. So I had to wait about a half an hour and come back and work with it. These are all the limits you're going to find when you start pushing these models. Again, depending on how much you spend on them, you'll have less of these barriers. Okay, that wasn't bad.
Not bad at all.
All right, so what do we have here? Compare and contrast Claude versus Grok analysis. And it talks about a structural comparison. All right, key elements, page count, Claude's approach. Okay, 3 times longer
Hmm.
than Grok's. And here it's starting to get into this. Well, let's see if you agree with this, Deirdre. It's saying Grok's strengths was more concise and scannable. Artifacts are ready to paste into documents, gets to actionable tables quickly, and it's easier to digest in one sitting.
Yeah. Now, it's absolutely true, and you can see in a few lines further down it says trade-off, brevity versus depth. What interests me is that there's a value judgment here, and whenever you see a value judgment, you have to remember that these are not machines that can make value judgments except what was programmed into them. So you always have to take the time to figure out, do you agree with this? Or what are the points on which they are creating some sort of value judgment?
So
I
let's
act
take Claude's strengths here. More comprehensive, better, deeper critical thinking, multiple strategic options explored, more nuanced reasoning. So do you agree with that?
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
I think that
But you
Grok
agreed with its view of Grok's strengths.
I do. And for example, here's something, what's its cause for saying it did deeper critical thinking? If it's only the length of the two documents, then that's not necessarily a valid reason
But
to
Deirdre's
call
point
it
is the
a
point
judgment.
that she said it's making its own judgment about what it sees, and that's a projected judgment based on the data it has in its training data and the way its algorithms are written and how it's learning from the combination of the two of those. It concludes that it's brevity of Grok versus depth in Claude. I'm not sure that you and I would come up with that same description if we did it ourselves. We might call Grok this way, but I'm not sure we'd call Claude this way.
Well, I think it's not so much that Grok has brevity, it's that it was looking for different information.
Well,
It
that's my point. We might say we agree with the strengths of Grok. We do not necessarily agree with the strengths of Claude, and we certainly don't agree with the way that you've made this judgment on trade-off.
correct.
That's the answer. Now, what that answer is what Deirdre just gave you. But I'm trying to focus on what are we seeing from this algorithm and why do Deirdre and I say you need to lead these things and you need to be making the judgments based on your considered knowledge, experience, and the way that you see the world. Now we could go through a lot of this, but you'll see it does good basic fundamental analysis. But again, we're not talking about doing what Deirdre and I might call A-level analysis on this because its conclusions many times don't match where we would go with these. About this kind of analysis that calls for great value judgments.
Mhm. And you'll see that it's noting that there's a great difference in the sources, selections, and so forth. No value judgment here, but Except assessment, Claude captured the big names everyone knows. Grok's list is more current. You know, interesting judgments here.
Yeah. I don't know, critical insight. I don't know if I agree with that. By the way, we want that because we want to see how is Claude analyzing this stuff so that when
And
it
now
does
notice
it,
the third bullet there, Tom. Both are correct from different angles.
that we agree with,
Yes.
right? And here's the thing, if we really wanted to do something interesting, we do the opposite. We'd take both of these and ask Claude to do an analysis. I would say for Grok too. Deirdre and I, we may do this on our own because I'm very interested now to see what are the differences in the value judgments in these critical insights, because that's where you really get a sense of when I look at your recommendations, do they fit how I see the world about this subject? By the way, this is where we think the real learning comes in. This is
Yeah.
where you, Deirdre, and Tom, we're learning now about this, how it's function, how it's thinking, what it's seeing that we may not be seeing. So this is where, if you really get down to, this is where you can be teaching. By the way, we think you can structure a curriculum to learn in school using this exact same approach. Just back up because establishing these research capabilities, learning from the research, proving your work all the way along the line, all those things, seeing how you have manipulated the model, all that stuff shows you whether somebody is learning something or not. How deep are they in the fundamentals of this particular subject? Deirdre, this is stuff you probably want to take a look at just to see what it's saying. But I think to be really valuable, we want to do the opposite. We want to have Grok do the exact same thing here.
Well, as you say, for our education about how these models work, what's very interesting is that Claude here is listing all of the points of comparison that the two models used, and there isn't that much overlap in the two lists. They
Yeah,
had different.
look at this. If you want to see this, it's saying the feature is here's what's different. This one said here's what it means. I don't know that I agree with what I've seen, Deirdre, that it said. By the way, I think it's right about Grok. That's what in a way, that's why we like to do the research in Grok. But I'm not sure I'm getting a real good feeling about the depth of recommendations coming out of Claude right now about this specific subject.
Correct. Not that anything here is wrong or not useful. It's just interesting the way it's going about doing this.
It's the same point we make about the use of models, right? We say, don't just use Chat GPT all day because, yes, you're going to get answers and they're going to look great, but it may not be deep in that particular area that you're playing in, and it may not have good depth. And by the way, that changes by the day because again, it's using current information from the internet in a broad base, and so it could drift. We could do the same analysis in a month and get somewhat different data, a different analysis because of the raw data that's being used. And if you really did this right, you'd start out by asking, what's your most current data? And sometimes I do that. In a projects that I work on, I always ask that question because data data currency about a specific subject is critical for what I'm doing there. But it's fascinating what it's doing here because this again is new to us too.
Correct.
And just
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, look at that. Grok is more decisive, but
yeah.
Claude is more thorough. That's an
Well,
interesting
that's the
value
theme,
judgment.
right?
I think it's right, but
Yeah. Yeah, no, and we've seen the same thing. That
right.
makes more sense. That resonates more with your and my view so far.
Correct.
But it's clear where they're trying to position themselves too, right? This is Deirdre's point too, that she and I talk a lot about that it the, every product has its own theme, right? and its own approach. And you can clearly tell that, by the way, Grok is not involved here, right? Because Grok's not making these judgments. That is kind of the way we see Grok, and this is kind of the way we see Claude.
Yes,
But that's again why we like to use both. And you'd find the same thing if you use other models. Um, we don't use other models for a reason. And a lot of it is just what we do and how we use them and how, again, these things are changing on a daily basis. Claude is changing on a daily basis. Anthropic's a little less that way. Gemini changes, they've made some changes there that make it very difficult for me to work and for Deirdre to work. Copilot just doesn't work for us. Um, and there are others that are really good. They're also Claude-like and maybe more Gemini-like, but not tied in so hard with the Google infrastructure, which again is causing a problem for me being able to use it because I can't use the Google infrastructure for security reasons. So it just gets in my way, and plus I can't have it on my machines. So anyway, these recommendations are really interesting. We need to go through this.
correct.
Um, Feature-based positioning, broad audience, differentiated formal methodology, format,
Hmm.
lower risk, audience-based positioning.
Hmm. Yeah,
Oh, this is really funny. Those
it is.
guys are techies. We're not. We're marketplace people.
Yeah.
That is hilarious. Now, by the way, it may be true. I don't know. You, Deirdre, you would have a better sense of that than me because you've been thinking about the subject more. But
Right. And I think we should point out to our listeners that our comments here are getting actually into the fifth step, which is the finalizing step.
exactly.
And this is the step in which the humans take this. They would take this document and I would print it out, or you could cut and paste it over into a different program. And you start to do your work and figure out how you're going to work with your information. And what do you bring to this? If you've been listening to what Tom and I have been saying, we've been bringing our knowledge of the industry, our knowledge of the marketplace, our knowledge of customers, our instincts about business, our judgment about what is right for where we want to go with the product. That's all part of what the human brings into the finalizing stage here. And I know you have a lot to say about this, Tom.
Oh, Deirdre, we could go on for a long time. We're What we're trying to do is just to open people's eyes. If they haven't gotten this deep using these, it's fascinating. You and I will go and we will do the same analysis in Claude and see what we get. It will be fascinating to see. This is an interesting, these two statements are very interesting. Grok's higher confidence for strategic decision, Claude's explicit unknowns. Critical question, is Grok overconfidence? Is Claude overthinking?
That's a fascinating
That
comment.
is a great point because that might actually be a question you would ask yourself based on what we've seen.
Right.
So again, that shows you the level of sophistication of some aspects of the algorithm and the data that is being used to train it. Gets into actionability. We'll stop here because you could drive yourself crazy trying to learn what these models are doing, what it did better. I mean, this is a really fascinating result. And again, we'll do it for Claude, do this comparison of Claude and Grok in Grok and see what Grok says. But I'm going to stop here, Deirdre, when I get to the end, which is critical questions, timeline, revenue model. Okay, now it's getting into,
A meta recommendation.
oh, very interesting, which
Interesting.
is what you and I talk about, right?
The immediate is follow Grok. The short term is follow Claude. Medium term is Claude. Let's see what it does for, um, okay, workbook with Grok's angle, this approach. Fascinating. It is making, but this is a value judgment. Remember, I don't just simply pick this up and run with it. I
I
take it.
don't think anybody would think you would do that, Deirdre, after
Yeah,
what you've said so far. But you're right. This is the machine's judgment, which is not a human judgment.
right.
And this is and right this moment for the much of this work, and I believe this will be a continuing thought process, is that what separates out the human from the machine is judgment. It is judgment. And that's what the now, can machines do better judgment on certain things? I believe we're getting very close on unsupervised self-driving of Tesla, since I have, access to some newer releases that is getting very close to being able to say that it's better than a human being because it can observe the environment 360-degree observation 100% of the time. A human can't do that. And so then, as long as it reacts the way a human does, and that's been discovered and learned over time, in most cases, I think it's going to drive better than a human if it doesn't already in most situations. So it's all contextual. But
Right.
this is fascinating.
It's truly fascinating. And there's a reason you and I, Tom, have been recommending all along that when leaders have serious questions to investigate, that they use two models or even
Mhm.
three models. And so they can do this sort of synthesis and get a deeper analysis, deeper understanding of the marketplace. Now, you could do the five-step process with just one model, as long
Absolutely.
as you are aware of the possible biases, of the limitations, and as long as you bring your knowledge and your judgment and your instincts to that. You don't have to do this. One of the reasons that we like to use more than one is we do a comparison to a focus group, an old-fashioned focus group, where someone brings in a number of people from various functions around the organization into a boardroom, sits them around the table, and says, I want your perspectives on this. And that is very much what using more than one models does for you when you run the same prompts through them and then see the different results. Remember, I saw only 25% overlap, and Claude definitely picked up on the limited overlap in its analysis there. So just as you would get different sets of information, different opinions from your experts sitting around the table, different recommendations from them, so the more models you use to work on the same problem, the more you benefit from having a bunch of knowledgeable people around the table. But then that puts the burden on you, the leader. That's how it always worked. The leader walks out of a focus group, sits down in his or her office, and does the work to figure out then what to do. And so that's the finalizing step. We've got the synthesis here. And now I, as the leader, am walking away from a focus group and figuring out what to do.
And
Uh,
so you could have a couple questions. Like the first question is, what could I take away from this and start using right now? That is, learn these models and at least learn two of them, right? You can choose a different two, but at least learn two
right,
and learn how they compare so that you know which one to go to for what. I have
correct.
very specific things I go to Grok for, very specific things I go to Claude or for whatever, and I do use Copilot. Every time I get on my Microsoft platform sitting here or applications, and I have questions, I go to Copilot. So think of the same way for when you're looking at these, the same thing holds true for when I'm using Google's problem. I will go to Gemini
Right.
and I will ask Gemini the questions. By the way, I don't always get the best answers from those two. I get them mostly from Claude or Grok. That's why I use those. But by the way, there are other really good models that we don't use. And I won't bore you with all the names, but there are some really excellent commercial models for you to be able to use. The other thing that you may ask yourself is, why do I need to do this? Right? If I'm an entrepreneur that's not in a tech business, but I'm in a non-tech business, but I'm becoming more and more tech oriented in my business, why do I even need to do this? And I'll tell you why. Your competitors will be doing this. right? They will. I promise you. This is like, why do I have to hire the best talent? It's the same reason. Your competitors will. Your competitors are going to do this. So that's the other side. If you're not automatically motivated to do this, um, try to motivate yourself because your competitors in the next couple of years, if they don't do it right now and haven't been doing it, they will. And you'll lose that ability that Deirdre just said is, look, it would take me a month to do this if I really did it. And more likely, you wouldn't spend the month doing it. You would do whatever you thought, a week, 2 weeks worth of work. If that, some people wouldn't even do that, and they'd publish.
Right.
It may be fine, but again, you're getting back to this fundamental question, what are you missing? And you don't even know what you're missing because you haven't really thought through that piece. So if you were to take away and say, all right, what can I use this very moment? Explore one of the other models, get to know it, and start doing compare and contrast. And and again, learn from the five-step process. You don't have to use all those steps for every single thing you do. Just know if I'm going to do this kind of work, I need to be able to employ a slightly different way of approaching it. Um,
Hmm.
and then lastly, is this really worth it? And I think the fact that you and I nerd out on it, Deirdre, is a different problem, right? But, but, so, okay, we admit that we may be a little bit biased in our direction of saying this is really important to get your arms around, and we're glad to help you. But again, the point here is really more about your competitors are doing this.
Correct. And I think it's worth making another basic point here, Tom, that we hear stories and we've seen output from people, students and so forth, where they stop at an early stage. They just use a model to, for example, do the research in phase one, and they don't take it through any of the other steps. And you can really tell that that's all that someone has done. And one, they're probably not doing the assignment or not doing what they want to accomplish, but it's they don't bring any of themselves to it. And where you really get the value in these models is creating the full human and machine partnership that you and I have been talking about now for multiple videos here, that you can use the machine to do some things for you, but then at the end it is you, the human, who bring your knowledge, your judgment, your understanding, your instincts to that product that the machine has output to create something that you can actually use to drive business results. If you stop at an earlier stage before that, it is likely that the output will not lead you to the results you want. This is basic, but I feel we have to keep repeating it for people, that there's far more to these models than simply doing a quick search.
And there are many ways you can learn and discover whether people are doing the work versus whether they're just using these tools to shortcut and have the tool do the work for them. There's so many easy ways of doing this. You don't have to be using other models to do that. It's more about you want to be able to see how they're using it. It's not what the output is. That's not the important thing. The important thing is to see how they're using it. And if you focus on how they're using it, you can quickly see and learn in parallel whether they're learning because the output becomes better. And then at the end, have them talk about it. Do the dissertation thing, right? Where
Correct.
they submit the paper, then they have to talk about it and defend it to you.
Right.
And these are all techniques that are very well known in the industry of education and certainly in higher education. But but this is where you're taking old techniques and applying them to the new context. It is really not hard. Is it going to be difficult to execute? You bet it is, for a lot of different reasons, not which a lot of them are structural. But is it a huge, interesting, and important challenge? You bet it is. What we're focusing on more right now, though, is the use by the CEOs of building and the people that are trying to build and create things at the highest levels with the greatest scale. It's always a pleasure, Deirdre.
Tom, always a pleasure. So long for now.